Hi, I'm Mr. Archibald, and welcome back to APUS History. All right, today we are going to work on short answer questions. The one here in front of you is, as I mentioned before, 3-point question with 3 parts, as you can clearly see. So what you need to do is read each question carefully and write your response. Use complete sentences. An outline or bulleted list alone is not acceptable. So answer parts A, B, and C. And you have a list of 7 geographical areas in North America. A, choose one of the North American cultural geographic areas listed above and explain how the environment affected the lifestyles of the Native Americans who lived there in 1491. B, choose a second of the North American cultural geographic areas listed above and explain how the environment affected the lifestyles of the Native Americans who lived there in 1491. And C, choose a third of the North American cultural geographic areas listed above and explain how the environment affected the lifestyles of the Native Americans who lived there in 1491. It's a 3-part question. It's worth 3 points. All you need to do is choose 3 of those geographical areas and explain in detail how the environment affected the lifestyles of Native Americans who lived there in the years leading up to 1491. Go ahead and pause this video and take a few moments to write your answers down. All right. Now, obviously, we're not going to be able to go over this online. In person. So you'll have to submit your responses to me online, and I will evaluate them. For those of us doing it in class, obviously, we'll have some feedback for that going forward. But basically, as you can see, you would take, for instance, the Great Plains and talk about how the geography affected the lifestyles. Well, vast herds of buffalo were the main source of food, so they were hunter-gatherers, so they followed the food. So their geography affected the way they built their shelters. They used teepees. They were very mobile. Their lifestyle revolved around the buffalo and all the things provided by the buffalo. The Great Basin, they were isolated from living in the mountains. It was pretty arid, and so they were not able to do a lot of growing of crops because of the lack of water, but they were able to do hunter-gatherer type of subsistence living. And we'll do the eastern woodlands. They lived in the woods where there were plenty of game, plenty of rivers and water, plenty of fish, and also because of the movement of maize, the exporting of maize farming from the Mesoamerican areas, they were able to build permanent settlements in the eastern woodlands, and their culture revolved around the farming and agriculture of corn, along with hunting and gathering in addition to those things. So those are 3 examples, and you see I just went right across the top there on those 3. You could have chosen any of those 3 as long as you correctly used elements of the geography to explain how the geography influenced the environment and the lifestyles of the natives who lived there. All right. So, very good. I hope you did well on it, and either way, we'll see the short answer again, and we'll improve our scores moving forward. All right, today, terms to know: Columbian Exchange, feudalism, capitalism, Christianity, Spanish Empire, encomienda system, the epidemics, and the caste system. Those are what we are going to focus in on today when we talk about the Columbian Exchange and European expansion. Big times, good times here. All right. European expansion first. Why expand? Well, there was a growing European population, and there was a growing political unification in Europe, which gave rise to larger unified states that needed funds to support their growing demands of government. Plus, hey, it looks good on the resume to have colonies all out there. So this glory, prestige, and the spreading of Christianity, currying favor with the Pope in Rome, that's always a good win for the monarchs. But probably the biggest one, the real biggest one, because here's where all the money is seeking better trade routes for the spice trade in the Indies. And when I say Indies, I'm talking about the Indies over on east of Europe, over in the Spice Islands near Indonesia. Why not use the existing trade routes, you ask? Well, that's a good question, and the answer is because in 1453 the Ottoman Turks had conquered the last Christian kingdom in the east. right here, where Constantinople was, that was the last Christian link in the in the Silk Road trade routes, the overland trade routes, to collect the spices from over here and bring them to Europe. So, with the Muslim kingdoms blocking the way, the nations of Europe really had no other option but to either trade with the Italian merchants who dominated the trade in the Mediterranean, or do without the spices. Since they really didn't want to do without the spices, they were looking for a cheaper route. The Portuguese had already begun dominating the route around Africa, as the Portuguese sent explorers down the western side of Africa and then eventually around the southern tip of Africa. The Portuguese built trading ports all along the African coast and dominated and controlled that trade route. So now the nations of Europe had two options. They could either trade with the Muslims via the Italians and pay an exorbitant price, or trade with the Portuguese, whose trade route was longer, but at least it was not dealing with the Muslims, and you still had to deal with the middlemen. So all the nations were looking for something else. Spain went west first. And in 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, and he discovers, air quotes here, discovers America. Why is it important? Yeah, the Vikings had gotten there first. We know that. But no one followed in the footsteps of the Vikings. And so that's why Leif Erikson isn't really known that well other than being a footnote in history. Columbus has cities and nations and colleges and all this stuff named after him. Why? Because everyone else followed in his footsteps. Not because he was a fabulous navigator, not because he was a wonderful man, not because he did anything great, other than the fact that he just kicked open the door and everybody else followed through. This led to, of course, a huge Spanish Empire, the Columbian Exchange, which we're about to talk about, and the European competition for New World land and resources. We're going to talk about the Spanish Empire first, because that was probably the most direct outcome of Columbus's journeys. You can see here all the New World colonies of Spain in red, and it is quite extensive, especially compared to the small Spanish island, the small isolated Spanish kingdom here at the Iberian Peninsula in Europe. Spanish colonies in North America. Obviously, we see here the several American states that would have fallen under the dominion of Spain. Most maps I've seen also would include Nevada and Utah and other parts up here of Colorado. But the thing is, most of the settlement, as this rightly shows, are hugging the coastline here in California. Santa Fe is probably the deepest they really got into the New Spanish world. And after that, there really isn't anything. So while Spain might claim all this land, it's really uninhabited and it's really a non-factor. So, Spanish colonies in North America, how do they get started? Well, some of the notable Spanish conquests: Hernando Cortez arriving in Mexico at the city of Tenochtitlan, defeating the Aztecs. There's a lot of stuff to be said there, a lot of cool things to talk about the Aztecs, but you probably already know that if you're here already. And if you don't, you're probably behind and you probably need to read up on them. It's a really good story. It'll definitely keep you up at night. It's pretty neat, the way the Aztec, neat as in interesting, not neat as in the outcome, because the outcome ends up killing millions of natives. And the Spanish end up plundering what is left of Mexico. But it's definitely an underdog type of story where you have a few hundred Spanish soldiers allied with several thousand natives overcoming a pretty sizable and pretty tough Aztec empire. 1532, Francisco Pizarro successfully manipulates an Incan civil war to conquer the entire Inca Empire. He does it with even fewer men, but he basically plays one side off each other all the way to Cuzco and then seizes power, and by then the Incan Empire is so fractured that he's able to basically dominate an empire that is far larger and far richer than the Aztec Empire with just his few hundred men. 1539, Hernando de Soto leads an expedition exploring the Southwest. Lots of cool things we get from Hernando de Soto's accounts. He ends up dying on this trip, though, so it ends up costing him his life, poor guy. And legend has it he's buried somewhere in the middle of the Mississippi River. But what it does give us is a very rich account of the lands and natives and the villages all through this land. We get a rich account of a very highly populated and densely populated area, which is interesting because a couple hundred years later, when the English come through, it's not nearly as populated. So some interesting discussions about what happens there, and many people tend to lean on the fact that it was probably that Hernando de Soto basically introduced plague upon plague upon plague, and it basically wiped out hundreds and millions of the inhabitants in that area. Another notable Spanish conquest expedition and accomplishment is the first permanent European settlement in what we now call as United States of America. At St. Augustine, Florida, is the first permanent settlement in what is now America, beginning in 1565. Also, during the 1500s, we have the establishment of several Spanish missions to the natives that were founded throughout the Southwest and up and down the California coast, ideally to spread Christianity, but also to pacify the natives by introducing Christianity. It's hoped that maybe not necessarily directly, but indirectly, it will help pacify the natives and make them easier to fold into the Spanish Empire. Speaking of folding into the Spanish Empire, let's talk about the system by which the Spanish tried to do that, the encomienda system. In Europe, we had a primary system of government that was feudal, the feudal system where kings have power and they share that power with nobles who support the kings, and then the nobles are leading the commons or over the commons, and the commons help support the nobles. So you have a hierarchy, social pyramid going with the king on top and the commoners on the bottom. So the conquistadors, who were the second sons and third sons and fourth sons of many of these noblemen and who had been excluded from inheritance due to the primogeniture, basically the passing down of the land and titles and wealth to the firstborn child. So these second, third, and fourth sons of these noble families were cut out, and those that didn't go into the army or those that didn't go into the clergy, they had to go somewhere, and so they often went trying to find their fame and fortune in the New World. So the conquistadors wanted to set up a very similar system to what they already had, the feudal system, with them on the top this time and the natives on the bottom. The idea was the Spanish care for and protect the natives work the land in return for the Spanish. It didn't work out exactly like that. In reality, it turned out to be much more one-sided, with the Spanish virtually enslaving the natives and doing little to help them as they die of disease and overwork and exhaustion. Also notable in the Spanish conquest and civilization at this time, especially in the New World, is the caste system. Race played a very significant factor in the role of a person's ability to gain access to Spanish colonial society. All the best positions were reserved for quote-unquote pure-blood Spanish, those peninsulares. Sometimes even lesser positions were reserved for Creoles, those who were born in New Spain of Spanish parents. So they were pure blood, but they weren't peninsulares. Okay. After that, we have the mestizos and the slaves, the natives and the slaves. The mestizos sort of not mosquitoes. The mestizos formed kind of a second-tier citizenship underneath the peninsulares and Creoles, while the natives and the enslaved Africans and others from the Caribbean were obviously at the bottom of the social pyramid. You see here on the right a painting called La Casta, and it goes into very detailed description of the various castes or levels of Spanish society. And so you have here Español con India, so Spanish with an Indian woman, you form a mestizo child. If you have a mestizo with an Española, then That's a castizo, okay? If you have a castizo with an española, then you get a full-blooded Spanish person. If you have a Spanish person with a Moor, then you get a mulatto. A Moor is a Berber or African Muslim individual that the Spanish had lots of conflicts with on the Spanish Peninsula. Mulatto with the Espanol, you have Morisco, and it goes on and on and on. It goes on this page, and you have all the way down to number 16 down here, and you've got some, and the further and further down here you go, you get some pretty derogatory words. For instance, here, the Salta Aztas con mulata equals a lobo, and a lobo is the Spanish word for wolf. That's not a very positive term that you're going to label this group of people. You're going to call them wolves. You're just going to set you against them and them against you, because no one has very many positive interactions with wolves, not at this time. So you can go explore that on your own time and see what you can find there. But you can see how it's highly structuralized in its positions that they place upon race, and who is higher than who. The Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange, what the heck is it? It is the exchange of plants, animals, people, ideas, and disease between the old world of Africa, Europe, and Asia, and the new world of North and South America. Notable transfers from the old world to the new: cows, pigs, horses, wheat, sugar, coffee, and plagues. From the new world to the old: turkeys, pumpkins, potatoes, corn, tomatoes, pumpkins, tobacco, and gold and silver. It seems that the new world was nicer to the old world. There's a lot that's said about these plagues, and we can't stress the point enough that plagues played a huge role in how many natives were left in the New World, and how hard it was for the Europeans to conquer a vastly weakened native population. But we must also understand that the Europeans had no understanding, or at least very, very little understanding of disease. And so while this is a horrible, horrible Holocaust that is inflicted upon the natives, it is in no way comparable to, the Holocaust of Europe or some of the other mass murders or massacres of society, because the Europeans did this virtually unaware. It was not something that they did intentionally and inflicted on the natives. So please keep that in mind before you go throwing people like Columbus and demonizing them and throwing them under the bus. You can throw them under the bus for things they did, and there's plenty in the record book that you can go ahead and go after them for. But intentionally killing millions and hundreds of millions, or however many you want to number it, that's not part of the agenda that I would attribute to any of to the Europeans. So what's the big deal here? Without this exchange, there would be no native Holocaust, diseases, or epidemics. Without this exchange, there would be no plantations in the world, therefore no race-based slavery. There would be no coffee. I have 3 E's in coffee. I have no idea why. In America, or tobacco in Europe. No fusion foods such as tacos, which is right there, tacos. That's the big deal. If for no other reason, we need the Columbian Exchange, because we can't have the chicken or the beef inside the taco without European, and we can't have the corn tortilla or the seasonings if we don't have the fusion from the Americas. So God bless the Columbian Exchange for that one right there. No pizza either, which is probably a big deal for a lot of people. Nor hamburger or fries, because potatoes come from the New World and the hamburger comes from the Old World. No jack-o'-lanterns, because pumpkins come from the New World, and Halloween celebrated in the Old World. And no Irish potato famine, because there would be no potatoes in Ireland to famine of. So they would have famined from something else, or not famined at all. So lots of different things would be different had there not been any Columbian Exchange. Now, that being said, if Columbus didn't do it, someone probably would have. It was only a matter of time before someone said, hey, let's sail over here just for kicks and giggles and see what's going over there. So that's another reason why we probably should take it easy on Columbus, because if he didn't do it, someone else would have. And the this exchange would have eventually happened. It may have unfolded much later, and it may be in a different manner. There is a lot that could have changed differently, but eventually this exchange would have happened. European competition for New World. Here we're talking about other European nations trying to muscle in on the New World. Well, France does so. They try to do so first. They do so almost immediately after the Spanish claimed colonies in the New World. In 1534, 1535, and 36, Jacques Cartier explores the St. Lawrence River looking for this northwest passage. The idea being that Columbus failed striking out trying to find that passage through the middle. He runs to a big fat continent. But hey, it can't go on forever, right? Surely there's a way to go around it on top, and that's what they're looking for. Unfortunately for them, it doesn't go all the way up, but it does go high enough up that the polar ice is going to cut off travel. They didn't know that yet, and so they keep looking for a long time. That's not successful. So Cartier, though, does a pretty decent job of exploring the St. Lawrence River and eventually giving France a presence in this new world. Samuel de Champlain found the fur trading posts of Quebec in New France, and Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet explored the upper Mississippi River, while Robert Cavalier Sieur de La Salle, also known just as La Salle, which is funny because Sieur de La Salle is his title, but he became so important and famous that he just preempted his entire name and said, "Yo, I'm La Salle, and that's how I'm going to be known." Explored and claimed the rest of the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes for New France. Basically, La Salle basically finished out the rest of this blue area we now call New France in the American colonies. France expands its economy through the fur trade. They focus on using the fur trade, which puts them in a positive relationship with the natives because they're not bossing the natives around, they're actually partnering with the natives. They are using the natives to go out and get these furs, and they are trading the natives' goods that they have, pots, pans, blankets, guns, ammunition, etc., for those furs. And so there's a natural positive relationship that is self-reinforcing, which means that the natives and the French become natural allies when conflicts begin to develop between the other European nations. This allowed the French to establish several strong military forts through the process of establishing trading forts, and these military forts became huge thorns in the side, especially to the English, throughout this colonial period. Places that we all know today, such as Detroit, Toronto, Montreal, Duquesne, also known as Pittsburgh, Sandusky, Vincennes, Niagara, all names that are pretty well known throughout, because they retain their names here to this very day. The Dutch try to come in. They hire Henry Hudson to explore America. He discovers and sails up the Hudson River, and then much of the land around what is now present-day New York and New Jersey is claimed by the Dutch, where they established the colony of New Amsterdam in 1624, purchasing the island of Manhattan for 60 guilders, or about $1,000 today. No one is really clear because he paid for it in 60 guilders worth of stuff, okay? But that same stuff is not worth nearly 60 guilders today. In fact, we would have much better stuff, but it would also be mass-produced, and so it would probably be a pittance of what he paid for the island of Manhattan. Either way, pretty good business deal. However you factor out the 60 guilders being worth today, if it's $1,000, even if it's $10,000, you bought the island of Manhattan. That is a pretty prime piece of real estate to this day. Too bad, though, the Dutch couldn't keep it because it ends up eventually becoming English territory, which we will have to save for a later date to talk about that. And finally, speaking of the English, we get to the ultimate goal here. The English in America. So the English come in and we're basically scraping together what's left. Using the idea of joint stock companies and the economic ideas of capitalism, the English try their hand at colonization. They start with the Roanoke colonies, founded by Sir Francis Drake. It fails. It's the famous missing colony. They found it, and then they can't resupply it for several years. And by the time they come back, it's not there. And the only thing they have is an abandoned village and the word Croatoan carved into a tree, and no one knows what the heck that means, other than the fact that it is the name of a native village nearby, or native people nearby. They can't find any remnants of these villages, so it's one of those really weird histories, mysteries kind of thing. So then later in 1607, they formed Jamestown, led by John Smith. The joint stock company, the Virginia Company, is the one that's doing that, and it eventually goes bankrupt. So much for the English doing well on this whole economic capitalism thing. But hold on. Even before it was going bankrupt, it was showing signs of promise. It eventually goes bankrupt in the year 1624, I believe, basically the same year that New Amsterdam was founded, and it defaults back to the crown. But even before that, even before it defaulted back to the crown, it was starting, or at least individuals in Virginia were starting to make some serious cash through the planting of tobacco. John Rolfe had, quote-unquote, acquired, some say stolen, some say I don't know how, but he had acquired seeds of Spanish tobacco that was very sweet and grew well in the Caribbean area. He had acquired that by some means or other and began planting it in Virginia, and it grew well, and it was very popular back in England. And so John Rolfe made bank off of that, and he became very rich, very influential. He marries Pocahontas. He is basically treated like, a king in the New World. Pocahontas is treated like English royalty. They end up going back to England. They have a son. They go back to England. And in England, of course, Pocahontas dies. She gets sick, catches some disease, cholera or something else, and dies. Her son is eventually adopted by somebody else because I guess John Rolfe is a deadbeat dad and he doesn't want to bring his kid back to the New World. I don't know why. I'll have to look into the backstory on that. But eventually, that child grows up, has kids. That daughter of his grows up, has kids, and she has a child that has lots of kids. And so we have. I haven't gone through the whole family tree, but I'm sure Pocahontas has family members roaming around in England somewhere, and probably in America as well. So that is the story of the Spanish, the Columbian Exchange, and the fight for what is left of the New World. And so here at this stage, we have the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, the English. Eventually, we get some, like a small Swedish colony as well. And then all of those colonies will be jockeying for position. And so we're going to talk about that, specifically focusing on the English colonies tomorrow, as we figure out how the English colonies ended up taking control, given the fact that they were so far behind. They were over a century behind the Spanish in settling in this new world. So how did the Spanish, with all their gold, all their advantages, all their everything, end up losing to the measly English? Well, we will talk about that next time. So hope you had a good time, hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all tomorrow.